Renaissance seer, possibly a question mark on that, because I'm not sure everyone kind of thinks he was, but you know, we'll maybe never get a conclusion on that. But I'll present some of the evidence and also go through his early life. So, what's so special about Nostradamus? Well, Michel de Nostradam, December 1503 to July 1566, better known as Nostradamus, was a French astrologer, apothecary, physician, and reputed seer, who is best known for his book Les Prophéties, published in 1555, a collection of 942 poetic quatrains allegedly predicting future events. So he was born, as I said, 21st December 1503, or possibly the 14th, but I think 21st seems more appropriate, in Saint-Rémy de Provence, the Kingdom of France. His grandfather was originally Jewish, but converted to Christianity a generation before Nostradamus was born. That was probably more to avoid dying or being sort of tortured, though, to be fair. But anyway, that's his sort of background. The origin of his surname Nostradam is down to the conversion having been solemnized on Our Lady's Day, Nostradam in French. He studied at the University of Avignon, but was forced to leave after just over a year when the university closed due to an outbreak of the plague. This was standard procedure at the time, the wealthy residents fleeing to the countryside. So, I mean, a lot of people think of the plague as being kind of earlier on, but in actual fact, as we know, it kind of carried on until at least 1666 in the UK, and it had been kind of ongoing since like the 1300s. So it was a thing that kind of people just ultimately just got used to it, I guess, and this just happened to be the standard procedure that they closed the university. So he worked as an apothecary for several years before entering the University of Montpellier, hoping to earn a doctorate. However, he was almost immediately expelled after his work as an apothecary, a manual trade forbidden by university statutes, was discovered. So it would seem elitism is not just a recent development. He first married in 1531, but his wife and two children died in 1534 during another plague outbreak in Agen. So his first career, well, I suppose second, because he was an apothecary. So second, but most notable, was as a plague doctor. So after the death of his wife and children in 1534, Nostradamus led a nomadic life for the next 10 or more years, traveling throughout France and possibly Italy too. Records of his exploits are sparse, but it's likely he carried on as an apothecary and plague doctor as he formulated his successful rose tablet, fresh air and cleanliness protocol for the ever-present bubonic plague. Now, the rose tablet was probably the thing that the people at the time thought, oh, that's great, that's the thing that will help us. But as we know, the fresh air and the cleanliness was almost certainly more the thing that actually worked in the case of bubonic plague. But he seemed to have a notable success, and well, he survived it, and so he made some money out of it. So on his return to the records in 1545, he is known to have been assistant to the prominent physician Louis Serre in his fight against a major plague outbreak in Marseille, and then tackled further outbreaks of disease on his own in Salon-de-Provence and in the regional capital, Aix-en-Provence. For his efforts in Aix, he was awarded a generous pension for life by the townsfolk. Finally, in 1547, he settled in Salon-de-Provence, where he again married, this time to a wealthy widow, Anne Ponsard, with whom he had 6 children, 3 daughters and 3 sons. Excuse me. Obviously, back then, having that number of children kind of gave you some hope that you'd actually have 1 or 2 that would survive beyond your life to help look after you. But as we saw with his previous family, nothing was guaranteed. Between 1556 and 1567, he and his wife acquired a 1/13 share in a huge canal project organised by Adam de Crapon, maybe a slightly unfortunate name, but there we go, to create the Canal de Crapon to irrigate the arid Salon-de-Provence and the nearby Désert de la Crau from the River Durance. The success of this project ensured that he no longer needed to carry on as a plague doctor or apothecary. So basically, I had enough money to invest in this, what probably was quite a big but seemingly risky investment at the time. And this was a sort of era, I mean, it was probably the equivalent to like draining the fens or, you know, any of the other irrigation schemes, because as the name shows, Désert de la Crau, it almost certainly was a very arid and inhospitable place before they actually managed to produce a canal for it. So that was kind of his fame and fortune at that point. But of course, everyone needs a hobby, don't they? So this is how we got into the almanacs. So Nostradamus was an academic of his day, well versed in the discoveries by Copernicus and the translated wisdom arriving into Europe via Florence and elsewhere. It was after a visit to Italy that Nostradamus began to move away from medicine and toward the so-called occult. Now, I should point out that back in these times, the occult merely means kind of hidden, not obvious. So just a little bit more edgy kind of than the mainstream. But there was an awful lot of things coming through, mainly through Florence, because the de Medici family over there actually were, you know, notable kind of patrons of the arts, and as we know from the museum still there, but they actually were translating things like the Hermetica and other books that were basically had been originally European, but had resided at times in the Library of Alexandria. But the majority of the copies there were destroyed, of course, when that was burnt. But a lot of the knowledge actually stayed on and was translated into Arabic languages. So it was in the Renaissance that those Arabic and Greek texts actually got translated into Western European languages. And although Nostradamus was fluent in several languages and probably was able to read, Latin and some of the classic languages, he wouldn't have had access to the books until they were translated in Florence. So, so that's an interest, so we have to take as the background. He was very learned and he had a lot of knowledge of some of the ancient texts. And of course, as we know, history kind of rhymes. So if something happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, then in the future something similar might happen. So, if you wanted to be completely cynical and go, it's all a guess, then he had a lot of source material to work from. So making use of contacts with printing presses and following popular trends, he wrote an almanac for 1550, for the first time in print, Latinizing his name to Nostradamus. He was so encouraged by the almanac's success that he decided to write one or more annually. Taken together, they are known to have contained at least 6,338 prophecies, as well as at least 11 annual calendars. Few, if any, are thought to survive until today, though. So the prophecies, and the things that obviously, Nostradamus is most known for the prophecies, but without the almanacs and the success of them, and obviously his success as a plague doctor, he wouldn't have the money to have actually come out with the prophecies. Depends how you look upon it, whether we're lucky that happened or unlucky, I guess. But because a lot of the prophecy is very dark, of course, but they're certainly of the age. So buoyed by his success with the almanacs, he began his project of writing a book of 1,000 mainly French quatrains, which constitute the largely undated prophecies for which he is most famous today. Fearing any intervention by the Inquisition, which obviously was quite a possibility in a very Catholic country ruled by His Most Catholic Majesty, he devised a method of obscuring his meaning by using deliberate obfuscation, word games, and a mixture of other languages such as Greek, Italian, Latin, and Provençal. In practice, neither prophecy nor astrology fell in this bracket of being at risk of execution or torture by the Inquisition, and he would have only been in danger if he had practiced magic to support his prophecies, which there's no evidence he did, so I'm sure he didn't. For technical reasons, his prophecies were published in 3 volumes. Typesetting was via dictation, so errors and misspellings were common. They may not indicate hidden meanings. So I think that's important to realise, because there are things, which I'll go into later, which might be, misspellings or might not be. So there's always debate over it. And I think no 2 copies that were printed back then were actually the same. It's worth bearing that in mind too. The last 58 quatrains of the 7th century have not survived in any edition known to have survived. So if you come across that, then it's either a fake or extremely valuable. Nostradamus was a scholar of historical classic works, as I mentioned earlier, so it's more than likely that he drew inspiration from those works for his predictions, since, as we know, history rhymes. The quatrains published in Les Prophéties, the prophecies, received a mixed reaction when published. Some people thought Nostradamus was a servant of evil, a fraud, or insane. Many of the elite thought otherwise, however, which of course led to his fame. In some ways unusual that he had a certain amount of fame during his own lifetime, because as we know, a lot of people that we talk about now were not famous in their lifetime. It was only subsequently. I think one of them being, well, some of them being like the composers and things that we think of. Bach, for example, was quite unknown, was just a music teacher in his lifetime, but it's now thought of as one of the greats alongside Mozart and the others, Beethoven. So yeah. So it was mainly in response to the almanacs that the nobility and other prominent people from far away soon started asking him for horoscopes and psychic advice. Catherine de' Medici, wife of King Henry II of France, was one of Nostradamus's greatest admirers. After reading his almanacs of 1555, which hinted at unnamed threats to the royal family, she summoned him to Paris to explain them and to draw up horoscopes for her children. In fact, his readings convinced her that Mary, Queen of Scots, would cause the premature demise of her sickly eldest son, Francis II, which did subsequently occur despite her moves against Mary. So, I mean, most people are not that familiar with like French Renaissance history, because obviously we had the Tudors. But basically, Catherine de' Medici was Florentine. So she was a Florentine queen that became Queen of France. King Henry II of France was the second son. His eldest brother, Francis, actually died after being imprisoned by the Spanish, because he never really recovered from that. So Catherine Medici was never meant to be the king's wife. So it's a case of a spare. So, you know, Harry might make it yet, who knows? So Catherine de' Medici, yes, very much a kind of a, I'd say, a Marmite character in history. But yeah, she did try and get rid of Mary, Queen of Scots, and, you know, move her away before she married her son. But that didn't happen, and he died. So at the time, he feared, Nostradamus feared being beheaded. But by his death in 1566, Queen Catherine had made him counsellor and physician in ordinary to her son, the young King Charles IX of France, Francis's younger brother. Being that they were very young, and that Mary, Queen of Scots, had gone back, and King Charles, again the second son, had become king, Catherine was effectively the ruler of France, which, being Florentine, wasn't the most popular thing, and she's kind of blamed for things like the massacre of the Huguenots at a later event. So yeah, as I say, quite controversial, almost as controversial as Nostradamus. So we move to the predictions, and funny should mention Henry II, because the first prediction, and his probably the most famous during his lifetime, although there's debate as to whether it was actually known during his lifetime, was the Golden Cage, the prediction about King Henry II. The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made 1, then he dies a cruel death. So I should say, and I'll distribute this, you know, put a link or whatever later to this, and obviously you'll have access to recording, but I've put in green all the text that matches up with some points that actually happened. So in the summer of 1559, King Henry II of France, the older one, lined up to joust the Comte de Montgomery, the young lion. I think he was in charge of the Scots Guards, who were a part of the French Royal Army at that stage. So he was 6 years his junior at a tournament lasting several days, held in Paris, in the Paris Tilt Yard, to celebrate a peace treaty between France and Spain, which was the field of combat. And tilt yards, yeah, they may not be battlefields, but they're very much a field of combat. Beforehand, Nostradamus tried to warn the king not to participate in any ceremonial jousting, but to no avail, much like his predecessor, his father Francis, and their contemporary Henry VIII. They loved jousting, and you couldn't really stop them, and being absolute monarchs, no one could. So if he wanted to joust, he was going to joust. And in fact, if you read the historical account of the jousting, he really went for it and was like, you know, somewhat he basically he took more risks than he should have done, let's say. So it was an accident waiting to happen. So both had lions on their shields, or at least potentially so, because I think there's some debate on that. In their final pass, Montgomery's lance tilted up and burst through the king's visor, splintering to pieces. Now, the design of his visor was very much a golden cage. because being king, he would obviously have, you know, ceremonial armor with, you know, gold, you know, gold covering, etc. So it was, you know, as you might expect, that, but yeah, quite a devastating blow, and kind of unusual for it to splinter, but it did sometimes happen. So 2 shards, one through the eye, pierced his eyes through a golden cage, and one through the temple, lodged in the king's head. 2 wounds made 1. So Henry suffered for 10 days, then he dies a cruel death before dying in his bed. I think it was the pressure on the brain was you know, horrendous for him. I mean, had they actually practiced trepanning, or, you know, making a hole in the skull as they did in much more you know, earlier times, that could have actually saved his life. And I think it was even suggested, but, you know, you did not make a hole in the king's head, because, you know, if you made a mistake or he died from that, then you'd just be executed. So, you know, that didn't happen. So this was the golden cage, so quite famous, and, you know, seems pretty accurate. We can debate that later, I'm sure, and I'll field some questions later. So next one, the Great Fire of London. The blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by fire in the year 66. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, and many of the same sect will be killed. So the small fire that started in the bakery of Thomas Fariner in Pudding Lane in London on September the 2nd, 1666, in the year 66, turned into a 3-day blaze that consumed the city. One of the explanations for the blood of the just refers to the millions of flea-carrying rats that were killed. Old St. Paul's Cathedral was the ancient lady will fall from her high place. 87 churches were also destroyed. Many of the same sect will be killed. Again, you know, killed, destroyed. We can always debate these. Peasant deaths were not recorded then, but it's long been believed that 6 people perished in the fire. And who knows, could have been a lot more, really. So that's the second one. And you can see there are certainly key things that that kind of line up here. So again, we can debate them later. Next one, the French Revolution. So from the enslaved populace, songs, chants and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons, these will in the future by headless idiots be received as divine prayers. So in 1789, the French peasants decided they had enough of bad aristocratic rule and revolted. Chants and demands. The peasants, enslaved populace, took control of Paris and forced their demands on royalty. The aristocracy, princes and lords, were taken from power, locked in the Bastille prisons and beheaded at the guillotine, the headless idiots. So again, you'll see, I actually, there's some other ones which are quite well known, but I honestly didn't think were that great in terms of the alignment, but these ones I think are worth discussion, certainly. So Napoleon, obviously, a bit more background on Nostradamus. Obviously, he lived his life mainly in Provence, but certainly in France and Italy otherwise. So a lot of the predictions do relate to France and French things and you know, areas within France. So it's not too surprising that quite a few of these ones actually are related to France. And of course, you know, England's being a near neighbour, Italy and Spain, you know, they're bound to kind of feature quite a lot. But there are some of the predictions that are thought to, you know, potentially relate much further away. But we should realise that by this stage, America was known, and you know, there were regular ships around. Because I mean, we would have had around about this time, you know, Drake looting the well, looting the trade routes, and this, the Spanish Armada would have been going on. So quite a lot going on during his lifetime. Anyway, looking forward, Napoleon. Pau ne Laurent will be more of fire than of the blood. Swim in praise, the great one to flee to the confluence. He will refuse entry to the piouses. The depraved ones and the Durance will keep them imprisoned. I guess even the fleeing is another thing that could be lined up. But okay, Pau ne Laurent, 3 towns in southern France, Pau ne and Oloron. Use anything that's capitalized is thought of as an anagram, one of the word games. So if you see that, then it's almost certainly an anagram. Here we go. So rearranging them spells out Napoleon Roy, or Napoleon the King in French. Certainly interesting and potentially the case. More of fire than of blood refers to Napoleon's common family line, because he wasn't of noble. He wasn't of noble birth. And the refuse entry to the piouses speaks to Popes Pius VI and VII, who were the popes at that time. I think in Nostradamus's day, there were a lot of popes, including the brother of uncle of Catherine de Medici, but they weren't piouses. So, but it's possible there had been a pious. So again, it's kind of maybe a guess that would make sense. But they both imprisoned by Napoleon. The depraved ones and the Durance will keep them imprisoned. Obviously, there was a certain amount of discussion around the popes at the time. And obviously, this was after the Nostradamus's life was after the time of the Martin Luther, who had accused, the Catholic Church of corruption, etc. So the depraved ones, possibly. Anyway, but that's a Napoleon one. Again, one to debate probably. Pasteur, no, this is an interesting one. The lost thing is discovered, hidden for many centuries. Pasteur will be celebrated almost as a godlike figure, which I think is correct. This is when the moon completes a great cycle, but by other rumours he shall be dishonoured. So Louis Pasteur will be celebrated, is credited with rediscovering microbial decay. The lost thing is discovered, hidden for many centuries, known in the days of the Library of Alexandria, but subsequently lost. In 1995, the science historian Gerald L. Geeson ran a story in the New York Times illustrating that Pasteur gave a misleading account of his preparation of the anthrax vaccine. Shall he be dishonoured? I think there's quite a lot of this went on, really, that, there were experiments done by some of these kind of greats that weren't so great in hindsight, and they did sometimes fake their results. So it's possible that this was one of them. So Pasteur certainly well thought of and pretty much a godlike person for a long time. But the glitter has certainly come off of his career. But Pasteur was certainly mentioned explicitly in the quatrain, but then Pasteur is, of course, a French name. So again, Hitler, well, obviously another well-known one here. From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He who by his tongue will seduce a great troop, his fame will increase towards the realm of the east. And beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Hister. Is it a misprint, or is it the name of a river? Into a cage of iron will the great one be drawn when the child of Germany observes nothing. So again, Germany mentioned. On April 20th, 1889, Hitler was born in Western Europe to impoverished parents, born of poor people. Hitler moved Germany to action in the years following World War I, partly who by his tongue, through his charisma and great oratory skills. His fame will increase toward the realm of the East. The Axis alliance with Japan in the East. Hister is believed to be a spelling error or an old name for the Danube through Austria. The British Empire will be the great one be drawn, and of course America, if you look at it that way as well. The German army invades France and the Low Countries with tanks, Cagevan, named after panthers, tigers, etc. Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. And the greater part of the battlefield refers to the Allied powers defeating Hitler. So obviously a lot of interpretation, but certainly you can see Hister, Germany, and a great troop seduced by his tongue certainly would fit with Hitler. So de Gaulle, obviously another French one, keeping it in the family. Hercules, king of Rome and of Anamark, quite grandiose. But then, as I mentioned, Nostradamus was, well learned. So, adding in things like Hercules and Rome and that, wouldn't be out of character, I guess. 3 times one surnamed de Gaulle will lead Italy and the one of St. Mark to tremble, first monarch renowned above all. And let's face it, de Gaulle certainly certainly has been very renowned throughout France. And yeah, Charles de Gaulle was a 3 times leader of France. His strong leadership sent ripples through its neighbours, Italy and the one of St. Mark to tremble. First as leader of the Free French forces, then as Prime Minister of the Provisional Post-World War II government, then as the first president of the French Fifth Republic, first monarch renowned above all. So certainly one for debate, but certainly has de Gaulle in it, and some of the things 3 times. So some of the things do fit quite closely, but again, debate. 9/11, obviously more recent event and further away, and therefore more up for debate and probably people shaking their head at the moment. Earth-shaking fire from the center of the earth will cause tremors around the new city. 2 great rocks will war for a long time. Then Arethusa will redden a new river. So very romantic in its dark but romantic in its rhyme there. So as we know, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, the 2 towers, 2 great rocks of the World Trade Center, again, world, so, around, etc. Shockwaves rippled around the world at this attack. Earth-shaking fire from the center of the earth will cause tremors around. The Afghan and Iraq wars, the Tigris River was an invasion point, will war for a long time, will redden a new river. So stretching it a bit more, but as I say, new city and 2 great rocks. Anyway, so those are the prophecies that I sort of picked out as the kind of really good ones. There's, as we know, there's hundreds and lots of them that we can line up with various events. There's 1 or 2 popular ones potentially for this year, with potentially King Charles not having his coronation, and Harry or another unexpected person ending up on the throne. So we'll see what happens in May, I guess. Anyway, so the death of Nostradamus. By 1566, Nostradamus's gout, which had plagued him painfully for many years and made movement very difficult, turned into edema. In late June, he summoned his lawyer to draw up an extensive will bequeathing his property plus 3,444 crowns, which is quite a lot, minus a few debts, to his wife pending her remarriage, in trust for her sons pending their 25th birthdays, and her daughters pending their marriages. A much shorter codicil followed this. He died on the 1st or 2nd of July 1566, aged 62, in Salon de Provence, Provence, Kingdom of France. Now, I haven't included it, but there was supposedly the story that he actually told his secretary that he would not be found alive in the morning, or, the morning after this. But there's no actual provenance that was kind of said at the time, and it may have, it was only recounted some 30 or 40 years later. So I've not included that, but some people have mentioned that. So that's it. There's I've included the references, but I think you probably want some discussion on that. So thank you. That's that for the moment. So.